everyone! Today's video is going to be my favorite palettes of 2019, and I love filming this video because it's a great way to look back on all the things that I really enjoyed throughout 2019, and of course because we're talking about eyeshadow palettes, it's even more exciting for me. Now I think the bulk of these palettes were launched in 2019, but not all of them. So this video isn't necessarily about all of the amazing things that launched in 2019 that I love, but it's more focused around all of the items that I found myself reaching for more and more throughout 2019. Most of these are new, however. Now I don't feel that most of the palettes mentioned in this video are going to come as any kind of shock to most people. If you've been watching me in the last year, I've probably mentioned them in favorites or in tutorials or in reviews. However, I do think this first palette is going to be a bit of a surprise. It's the Tarte Unleashed palette. I don't know what happened with this palette because nobody talks about it. I saw almost no reviews on this thing. I don't even feel like the brand promoted it that much. But it's really unfortunate because this thing is fantastic. It's one of my favorite Tarte launches to date. Because the color story is just fantastic. I like the packaging even though it's in plastic and I prefer cardboard, but the mirror is enormous and such good quality. But packaging aside, the eyeshadows in here are so freaking lovely. The thing that appeals to me the most, I think, about this palette is the fact that it falls into my kind of color scheme for neutrals with a little bit of color. I do opt more towards the warmer type of neutrals, and that's what we're getting right here. Like, we've got some really bright oranges, which really make me happy, and they're matte and absolutely beautiful. We've also got a really bright gold down here, which is gorgeous, and then this kind of like typical champagne color that a lot of people will use on their lid. But what I like about it too, man, this palette's actually kind of hard to hold up. What I like about it too is that there's this really like deeper maroon shimmery color that you don't tend to see a lot in a lot of palettes. So I really enjoyed that. And then we come over to this area over here, and I really like these blue-green colors. This one over here, what do you call, Totally? Oh, it's so pretty. Gorgeous on the lid. And then Party Animal down here is really beautiful. That's a great blue. And then this shade down here called Awkward is bizarre. It's kind of like an old gold with a silver-esque reflect to it, but sometimes a little bit of green. It's weird, but it's so much fun to play with on the lid. The palette also smells really good. It's got that like vanilla scent to it, and the quality is just overall fantastic. Nobody talks about it though, and I don't know why, because this is such a good launch for 2019. Tarte did an amazing job on this palette. One of the more recent launches that I have to talk about because I just fell in love with it right away is the Faced Hot Buttered Rum palette. This is in their mini size packaging. I am really enamored with the petiteness of this. It only comes with 8 shadows, which normally I would say is not enough, but there's something about the aesthetic and color scheme in this palette that really works for creating looks. Again, it's very similar to the Unleashed palette in the sense that these more neutral tones do tend to fall into that range of neutrals that I really enjoy, which is to say warmer, a little bit more vibrant, a little bit more mustard over here, and a little bit more red orange over here. This isn't as red orange as I was expecting, but it's still a really deep, beautiful outer corner color that I reach for a lot. I'm just so pleased with this, especially given how much I just didn't care about the rest of Too Faced holiday launches this year. So when I saw this, I was not only enticed by it, but when I got to play with it, I really liked it. And I did post a review video on it, and I was surprised at how many looks I got out of this 8-pan eyeshadow palette, because honestly, I bought it thinking it was pretty, but I also thought it was gonna be kind of a little bit of a one-note palette. No way. I got 5 looks out of this thing easily, and there's so many more I could create. So I was really impressed with this palette and quite enamored with, honestly, just how cute it is. The next palette is gonna come as no surprise because I've talked about it a lot this year. It is the Violet Voss Sugar Crystals palette. I think I described this one time as me in an eyeshadow palette because it was rainbow, which I can't stop yammering on about rainbow eyeshadow palettes. I'm so sorry, but it just makes me happy. So this is my aesthetic, and this is me in an eyeshadow palette because it's not only vibrant and really bright, but it's also a rainbow palette. And I love this upper row here of matte, vibrant colors. They're not neons, but they perform very well because they are so bright, but not a neon pigment, which can be a little bit patchy. But then you've also got this secondary row of like mid-tone to light shimmery colors that some of them have a little bit of a duochrome reflect to it. They're so pretty. And then this bottom row is like the perfect inner corner highlight shade for any color of the rainbow. I am just so happy with this palette, and I'm glad I didn't stop looking for it, because initially when this launched in February in the US, it was there for several months and it never came to Canada. It wasn't until I found it in a Sephora store, and it's still not available online in Sephora Canada, which is really irritating, that I finally was able to pick it up months later. But I was still entranced by this palette, and that doesn't always happen. Sometimes I can think an eyeshadow palette is so beautiful to look at, and then I get my hands on it and I just don't care anymore. This was one of those ones that I waited and waited and waited to get just because I had no accessibility to it, and then when I got it I was like, you're gorgeous and you are perfect. So I am so pleased with this eyeshadow palette. I ended up giving this palette away in my blog's 6th anniversary because I love it so much. This is such a good purchase, and I think it's on sale now too. Or was that only a temporary like Black Friday sale at Sephora? I think this got down to like 33 bucks or something like that. Go get it, it's wonderful. So there's a Too Faced palette I'm gonna talk about right now that I'm surprised I'm mentioning in this video, but I used it quite a bit this year, so it's clearly something that I really enjoy, and that is the Too Faced Sparkling Pineapple eyeshadow palette. This was part of their Tutti Frutti collection, which I don't think sells very well because you can buy this for quite cheap at Winners now in Canada. It wasn't previously available at Sephora. I think it was an Ulta exclusive, but if you're in a Winners, you can get this for I think about 20 bucks, which is great. So this is honestly just a neutral palette. Not that exciting to look at really, but I have reached for this quite a bit. I ended up bringing it with me for a very short vacation. It was actually for a funeral to the US this past summer, and it was just one of those workhorse palettes that I knew was going to look pretty, because I mean, I'm going to a funeral. I didn't want anything extravagant. I just wanted to look nice. And I brought this palette and it worked for me that entire weekend. There's colors in here that can create a subdued look, and that's all I really needed at the time, but there are some fun colors in here too which can really amp up the look. This one right here is that kind of green brown pigment. I tend to get a lot of green out of it when I put it on my eyes, but when I see it on other people it tends to look quite brown with a shift of green, so I think it just totally depends on like your eye color and your skin type. The gold in here is really nice as well, but the shade I have to talk about is this one over here. This is the best formula of shimmer eyeshadow that Too Faced has ever made. I don't know why Too Faced doesn't replicate this formula of eyeshadow more in their palettes, because it is the smoothest, creamiest, most saturated pigmented eyeshadow that they've ever made in like that shimmery foil textured finish. And there is, I think, 2 other colors in the raspberry palette of the same nature in this collection that also have that texture, and I'm just blown away by it. It is so good, and I want to see more of it because it's phenomenal. Anyway, this little palette turned out to be really handy, and I honestly, even when I'm not traveling, I have reached for this consistently just because it's cohesive. It's a really easy to use eyeshadow palette and the colors go together so well. I've got a bunch of NYX eyeshadow palettes I have to talk about. These 2 were part of their Off Tropic collection, which was limited edition, but I still see bits and pieces of it available on different websites, so you can still get some of it. So I think I've mentioned this one here, Hasta La Vista, quite a bit, but I haven't mentioned Shifting Sand as much. Not really sure why that is. Maybe it's because one of them is a little bit more of a rainbow palette, and the other one, if I can get it open here, is a little bit more subdued. They're still fairly vibrant and bright. I reach for these guys all the time. All the time, like weekly. There's something about the color schemes in these 2 that just seem to really coordinate with a lot of other eyeshadow palettes that I use. The bulk of these shades in here are matte, which is great because I'll reach for them and put them through the crease, or use like one of the deeper purples here to accent another purple look that I'm doing by putting it on the outer corner. The brown tones in here are actually quite unique. I feel like I don't normally say that about brown shadow, but this one up here and this one down here have a little bit of a mustard lean to them, and I've been really into yellow eyeshadow this past year, so I found those 2 very handy to use. I even like this deeper, it's like a pink raspberry, beautiful color. These ones are just so handy to have on hand. I think they were 20 or 30 bucks, which can be a little bit up there for NYX, but I've used these so consistently since I got them from PR. They were in a PR package. that I would recommend these to anybody. The texture is great. Some of them can form a little bit of hard pan, specifically this pink one up here, but I'm not really much of a pink person. But the rest of them just have the right tones, the right textures, right blendability. I love these things. I love them so much. I've used these so consistently in the last year that they're absolutely staples in my collection. And if I didn't have these regularly to reach for, I would be upset because they're wonderful. And in talking about NYX products that I find absolutely vital in my collection, I have to talk once again about this Ultimate Brights palette. This is just another one of those workhorse palettes. It's a rainbow palette, but they're all matte in here, and I use them so consistently for crease colors. Generally, it's because I'm reaching for the paler shades. I reach for this purple a ton to put through my crease. The yellows I used so much throughout, I feel like it was June and July. I was so in love with using yellow eyeshadow on my eyes, which I didn't think was gonna be a good thing, but it turned out so pretty. The greens I reach for constantly. Those two will make a beautiful gradient through your crease. The purples, the oranges, the red, like look, this is just a really great palette. I know a lot of people have said that they didn't find the pigmentation was very strong on this. I think it might be because I'm using it a little bit differently than other people are using it. I'm not using this as an all over eyeshadow look. I strictly reach for this to use as a crease color, which is traditionally something that I want to be a little bit less opaque and a little bit more sheer. So maybe that's why I'm having so much success with this. When I look at these, I see them as like mid-tone to pale colors. I don't see them as really deep. And deep colors are what I tend to put on the outer corner of my eye, which is why I wouldn't reach for this to put it on that sort of area. And that is why I'm reaching for it to put through my crease, because they just make beautiful transition colors for other colorful eyeshadow looks that I'm doing. So between like this palette and these ones here, I've had such good experiences with them, and they sit like front and center on my vanity because I reach for them so often. Another absolute winner this year was by MAC. This is their Art Library Flamboyant palette, and it is predominantly a red toned eyeshadow palette, but that explains why I like it so much. So the whole bottom row here is very much red tones, and there's matte and there's shimmery shades in there, which is fantastic. But what makes the palette really cohesive is the fact that you've got this like orange toned row in the middle, and then you've got, they're kind of orange at the top, but they're a little bit more brown toned as well. And it's just a really cohesive eyeshadow palette. I've mentioned before that I feel like red eyeshadow is my kind of neutral. It's the one that I go back to the most. It's the one that makes me feel the most like me in a subtle way. I know people don't think that red eyeshadow is subtle or neutral, but it is my version of subtle and neutral, and red eyeshadow just feels like home. That's the best way to describe it, I guess. So this one just makes me really happy whenever I use it because it basically has everything that I need to create a very me look. And I hemmed and hawed over buying it initially when I think it was during the Sephora sale, and I was just like, I don't know if I need it. And honestly, I am so glad that I picked it up because I'm in love with this palette. And that doesn't always happen lately. I feel like sometimes I'll buy palettes now and I'll be like, you're fine, but I don't love you. This was one that I truly loved. And honestly, I was a little bit excited to be excited about liking MAC stuff again, because like MAC is where the root of my makeup love came from, and I don't feel like I've loved a lot of their products over the last few years. So when I tried this out and really was enamored with it, I was really happy. So wonderful, wonderful palette. Okay, this one isn't an eyeshadow palette, but I have to talk about it because it's clearly a palette. This is the Highlight and Glow palette by Quo. This is the version that they launched for holidays 2018, and I only really, I think, started digging into it within December and then through 2019 as well. This is a face highlighting palette, although I'm sure you could use these as eyeshadows because it's just powder. This is wonderful. I know I've mentioned this quite a few times, but this is the most exciting product that Quo has ever put out for me. I just love that they not only have sort of more traditional highlight colors with the more amber and bronze colors down here, but they've also got like peach colors up here. They've got this like lavender, almost pinky gold peach shifting one down here. This is your more traditional white gold highlight, but then this one appears like an icy blue purple. This is so exciting from Quo, and they made it a permanent product, which makes me so freaking happy. I think the packaging is a little bit different, not by a huge amount because it is still made out of cardboard, I believe. But I'm just so happy that they had this limited edition product that turned out to be my favorite thing ever, that they have ever made, and turned around to make it a permanent product so that other people can get their hands on it, because this is truly wonderful. And it's just nice to see a Canadian drugstore brand put out something that's a little bit unique. I feel generally Quo can be quite safe. They will put out a lot of neutral tone palettes, a lot of traditional lipstick colors, and I just don't find a lot of exciting products in their range. A lot of them can work just fine, but none of them are really like, ooh, that's interesting to me. This was that piece, and I am in love with this palette. I still reach for it all the time. All the time. This thing is fantastic. So the very last palette I have to talk about is gonna come as no surprise to anybody. This is hands down my favorite eyeshadow palette of 2019. It is the ColourPop Chasing Rainbows palette. And sadly, it is out of stock now. This held on to ColourPop's website for so long. I feel like it launched in, what was it? Maybe October of last year, and I don't think I bought it until January, and it only recently just went out of stock, which is so annoying because it's so wonderful. So the Chasing Rainbows is kind of a rainbow palette. I mean, it's not quite there because there is no red and there is no green, but it's one of those easy to wear rainbow palettes. The color combinations in here are just so beautiful. I brought this with me on vacation, I think 2 or 3 times in the last year, and I never got sick of it. I took this with me specifically to England and Ireland, loved it, came back from vacation, and continued using it for the next week just because I didn't want to be done with it. The shades in here are just really perfect. I've done some beautiful purple looks, some beautiful purple, silver, and pink looks. The yellow with like the more orangey pinks over here is glorious. This fun like silver gray, but there's some brown shot through it as well, called Eclipse, is gorgeous on the lid. You've got another blue brown pigment over here, which I don't tend to use as much because I feel like I'm overdosed on that color in other palettes. This matte teal is wonderful. You've got a black down here, which is so handy to have because it will deepen up a lot of the other colors in here. The only shades I didn't use that much were the 2 browns, which is Feeling It and Realness. I did touch on them a few times more when I'm using like I feel like the yellow and the orange, but really I feel like those 2 are maybe a little bit out of place in this palette. But I mean, they do round out the palette, so I guess that does help. Not everybody's looking for all color all the time, even though I may be. So there's something so special, so unique about this palette, not only in the color shades, but also how it's laid out. I love the fact that it's in cardboard packaging. I love that it's called Chasing Rainbows. I just think that's the cutest term. And very me, because I'm always chasing rainbow eyeshadow palettes. It's such a lovely palette, and I don't get sick of it, which is really impressive because I've used this more times than any other palette that I've used this entire year, and I still love it desperately. All right, so that's gonna be it for my favorite palettes of 2019. I will be following this up with a favorite makeup products of 2019, but I wanted to keep the palettes separate because I've usually got a lot to say about them, and this video is long enough as it is. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you found this interesting, and I will see you next time. Bye.